Ready, set, go, action. We're live on both IG and YouTube. And today we're doing last Wednesday's Real Talk on real estate. We had a busy week. We were down at the Forward event with Neil and Cole and Ed Milet and some real good friends and good colleagues. And that's not why I'm here today. I'm back in the office. We're back at it, and we want to talk about real things, real estate. Hey, I wanted to drop this on you guys real quick. So we're going to talk today. We're going to be talking about the best ways to finance real estate development. But I want you guys to Google this today. We are sitting upon the brinks in the release of J.P. Morgan having its best second quarter that it's ever had. And it is up by 70% of its second quarter numbers of 2022. And money, as expensive as it is, and they're lending it to us at a premium. And JP Morgan is having record-breaking profits. Go figure. Most people don't realize, they'll take my video down for saying this. The central banks, they run the Federal Reserve. And I've been talking about this forever, since I've been going live with you guys. And it's a ruckus, but it's true. And most people think that John F. Kennedy was assassinated because he was Catholic. It's bullshit. That has nothing to do with why JFK was assassinated. One of the biggest reasons that JFK was assassinated was because he was trying to dismantle the Federal Reserve because it's non-constitutional. Our central banks run the Federal Reserve. And so if you guys think that in this time where money is expensive, the banks are struggling, you got something else. You got something else to be looking at, because maybe local banks, regional banks, stuff like that. Well, those banks may struggle a little bit more because they're privately owned and operated. But the central banks, just ask the FDIC. Is it a 60-minute video or a 2020 video? I can't remember. I think it's 60 minutes. They interviewed the FDIC, and they asked them. They said, "Well, if all these banks are in trouble, how about the big guys? Like, is our U.S. banks in trouble? Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, J.P. Morgan, Chase, and all the big guys, Goldman Sachs." And she goes, "Well, those aren't quite just American financial institutions. They actually are bigger than that. They have multiple sectors, which they do, but they have international interests. And so they don't have the ability to regulate the central banks, the big guys, like they regulate the small regional banks." And so, just FYI, when you're thinking that our banks are broken, they're not. Money costs banks right now about 4.8%, but they're lending it at 7%. So there's a massive spread. And they did this spread in lieu of bankruptcies, which haven't come into fruition yet, on a modest amount, but they are profiting massively right now. So look, what is the best way to finance real estate development? Is it through the banks? Well, ultimately, you're going to get the most money. Now, is it the best way to finance commercial real estate and investment real estate and all of our developments? Let me explain to you guys. I'm going to give you guys some key components here, and I'm going to give you like a perfect world scenario. And I did this perfect world scenario in a stubborn fashion back in 2010 because I was worried and concerned that I was going to get stuck with land that I was developing because of what happened in 2008. So when I started kind of doing small developments again, looking at them in 2010, but 2012, here's what I learned and here's how I did it. And this is the best way to finance real estate development. So if you're doing raw land, I'm going to give you guys a couple different asset classes and examples of this. So that way you guys have a keen idea of not just vacant land, but also assets, multifamily, warehouses, so forth. Okay. But let's talk about vacant land real quick. Perfect world scenario. This is the scenario that I exercise when I'm doing raw land development. And it's the way that I was stubborn about doing it. And I wouldn't make any compromises in this type of negotiation. If the seller would not agree to negotiate in my perspective of what I wanted, then it was a dead deal in my eyes, because when I look around, there's no shortage of land. Now, I know that most people feel like there is. And there is a shortage of land that the city and municipal leaders will support for certain demographical development. But if you're doing single family residential, or even even if you're doing large commercial development, here's how I go in with the sellers. First and foremost, they have to be willing to either do one of two methods. They either have to be willing to do an owner finance agreement where they actually finance the land for me. But even more so, when I do owner financing, I still carry the liability. So in a perfect world, that's not the best way to finance real estate when you're doing developments, because you still have liability. If there's interest that's being paid, then there's liability. Now, if you can negotiate a short-term 0% interest, then owner financing is awesome. So you can go in and negotiate a 1 or 2 years 0% interest payment and offset the long-term capital gains for that seller. And that's what's advantageous about that on the selling perspective. Or do a really modest low interest rate, but I usually try to negotiate 0% for a minimum of 1 year, but I always ask for 3 in lieu of trying to get 2. So I have a safety net as I work on entitlements, as I'm working on architecture, engineering, so forth and so on. So one of the big things is positioning myself where I have leverage and I have options. So when I go in, I'll do a modest amount of escrow money, earnest money, to be able to secure the land, showing them that I'm serious. And then I go in, I ask for a delayed due diligence period. Typically on a large development project, I'm asking for 90 to 120 days to close, and sometimes even more. And the way I do is I ask for 90 days worth of due diligence and a 60-day close. That's a 160-day close from the time that you negotiate. Now, I typically will drag my feet for at least 30 days or longer, just negotiating the letter of intent and PSA, the purchase agreement. And the reason that I do that is because if I go in and I leverage time, it takes my attorneys at least 10 days for turnaround time. So if I go back in with a letter of intent, then I give it to the seller, then they have their attorneys review it, then they bring it back to me. I have my attorneys review it. We're going back and forth, and we burn up 30 days right there. Guess what I'm doing during that first 30 days? My due diligence. I'm taking advantage of additional due diligence period. So if it takes us 30 to 45 days to actually get a negotiated agreement set forth, then what I'm doing is going in and asking for an additional 90 to 120 days of due diligence. And I have 160 days. Plus I get an additional 60 days at minimum of closing time. So I might be in there for 6 months before I even have to close on the property under those circumstances. Now, if I'm doing raw land, I put in there a contingency, and with that contingency, what I'm actually telling them is I'll put those terms in place, but I'll make it contingent on my ability to get entitlements and zoning approval and the density that I'm looking for. So I'll put those 3 parameters into my purchase agreement and into my letter of intent. This way I have options, and I also have the means to extend my closing. Okay. Now, typically, you going to bed, baby? I love you. God bless you. I'll go down in just a few. And so one of the big things is I'll go back in and I'll negotiate those contingencies. So this way, if it does take me longer to go in and do what I need to do as far as entitlements with the city or municipality, I can just extend it. Now, what I do have to do as a requirement is exercise the contingency and extension with a written letter stating that we haven't had it. And I do have to show proof. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll have the city municipal leaders we have an exchange of emails ongoing all the time. So I'll typically show them our progress, where we are in the entitlement process. And then I'll send in a letter stating that we haven't received the density or zone changes or whatever we're seeking on that land. And we'll go in and we'll exercise an extension on our purchase agreement for closing because of the contingencies that we put in there. Now, when I was doing raw land, I would get these things extended out at least 1 year and sometimes even longer than that. And the way we were able to do that was exactly the way I just explained. Now, here's what's cool is that in this process, a lot of times the seller gets a little bit nervous. So they want some type of guarantee or some type of affirmation that you're going to move forward with it. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put my money where my mouth is, and I will give them a little bone And what this does for me is it reduces my liability. Now I control the asset. I don't own the asset, but I'm putting good faith towards what I'm doing. So I can go in and let's say the land is a $1 million piece of land. And if I go in and I give them $50,000 as a security deposit or $100,000, that just sits in escrow. That's going to go towards the payment of the land. Now, if we go in and we need an extension, maybe we'll go non-refundable on 50,000 of that. Or we'll come in with a little bit more escrow money, just showing, hey, we're really serious about this purchase, but we just need more time. And in lieu of that time, we'll give you a little bit of money. And the money, what's cool about putting it towards the land is that as you move forward and as you move through 90 days, 120 days, if you're doing your due diligence correctly, you'll already have an indication of whether that deal is going to go through or not. At least you'll be about 80% to 85% sure that that deal is going to go through. And if it's not, that's where you actually pull the plug, you walk away and you migrate to something else, and you just dust your hands of that project and you go away because you don't have any liability because none of the money is hard yet. So all you have wasted is time, and it's protecting you. Now, what this also does is it protects me from debt service that I have to give investors, or I have to pay the owner financing, or a bank, or whoever finances that land. Or that asset, I have to go in and start servicing that debt. Now, if I do it the way I'm explaining to you guys, it reduces my liability substantially. And the money that I'm actually putting towards that asset is going to go towards the actual purchase of it. But I'm not servicing debt. So it brings down my liability. It brings down my debt service. So it brings down my overall cost of development long-term over the course of the build, because I'm not servicing debt on that land or on that asset until I actually get closer to closing, or I do it at closing. And so substantial reduction of liability doing it this way. Okay. Now that's perfect world scenario. Now you go in through for all the entitlements, and in a perfect world, when we go in, or just do it again on a 2-year hold. Okay. I'm not quite sure what you were asking, but if you give me a little bit more insight, I can answer your question here. Nonetheless, what we do is we'll go in and I'll work through all the entitlements during this time period. And as we're working through all the entitlements during this time period, we're adding value to the land. And someone just asked me the other day, they said, Jerome, I understand that banks are only giving you what the purchase price is on that land. Okay, well, I'll just sell it to one of my LLCs, or and I'll do a capital raise. Then that gives me the ability to actually repurchase that land under a new LLC. So if the banks do that, okay, and they say, well, we're only going to give you the value of what you purchased it for, yet you just dumped $300,000 into it, 90% of the time, the banks will allow you to get an appraisal on the land with the entitlements. And what the appraiser does is he takes the entitlements. They take the entitled land and they'll take the designs of whatever's on the entitlements, and they'll do an appraisal of what that asset's going to be worth. And then they'll give you a percentage of value of that land. So if you paid $1 million for it, but yet you're going to put 200 units of apartments, or you're going to put in 150,000 square feet of industrial warehouse on there, they're looking at the asset based on the value of revenue that's going to come in. So the appraised value of that land goes up substantially. Then the bank collateralizes it. Now, what the bank is doing right now is they're only giving about 75% of the value of the land that it was once giving 100% just 2 years ago on the appraised value of land. So understand that on appraised value of land right now, it's only 75% of the appraised value, as opposed to the 100% that they would collateralize just 2 years ago, but still giving you a very kind amount towards the land if you add value to it by entitling the land. So what we do under traditional circumstances is we go in and we utilize the collateralized amount of the land and the new value of that land to go towards the down payment and the 30% loan, the 70% loan to cost, which is our 30% down payment that we would have to collateralize the development. And so this is the second way that we like to leverage land, and the second way that we actually like to finance land for a real estate deal, a development project, is utilize the land towards the collateralization of the down payment or the equity holding of that loan. Okay. And then we go in for institutional money. Now, right now, you have to understand the difference between debt and equity. And here's why. Because if you're financing land, ladies and gentlemen, or you're financing a development, what you have to remember is anytime you raise debt, you have liability. The second you take somebody's money as a debt and you're giving a pref on it, a preferred interest rate, which is going to be someplace in the neighborhood of 8% to 12%, then you're right immediately increasing your risk, because every time you service that debt, you're adding to your bottom line and the expense of that project, because now you have debt service. Okay. So when I look at right now, when money's expensive, I sit back and go, okay, how do I reduce my liability and reduce my risk on this development? Okay. Now, if you guys know me and you guys follow my content, one thing that you guys know that I hate to do is I hate giving equity away, because I love retaining the equity. Because in a perfect world, when I own 100% of something, the internal rate of return, which is the money that you make when the asset goes up, 100% of that becomes mine on the value, because you're only collateralizing the land and the asset to the bank that you initially financed. So when you hold 100% of the equity, all the upside, 100% of it goes to you. So I love the equity. Now, the cash on cash return, the money that you make on the original amount invested in the project, then that 100% of that also goes to you instead of investors as well. So I love the equity standpoint of equity retention in every single deal. Now, here's the problem, guys. Now, look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you guys the caveat to this, but understand, if you guys like this content and you guys want to see more of it, then pound that thumbs up button, click and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And that way you're notified every time that we post and go live with new content just like this. Okay. So here's the caveat to equity. Now, the caveat to equity, retaining that equity, is that you have to raise debt in order to finance that development. And right now, debt is extremely hard to raise the quantity that you need, because we were able to do an 80% loan to cost, meaning we were able to borrow 80% of the bank's money based on the cost to build it, and only have to collateralize 20% of the equity. Okay. Today, realistically, it's 60% of the bank's money and 40% collateralization of our own money. Okay. Or our own equity, which is a massive variance, because now we're raising double the capital. So when we go in and do that, we raise debt, we're raising double the capital, and debt's expensive. Our liability and our risk goes up, because now we're raising double the money, and typically private money is more expensive. So if we're giving 8% to 12% pref on it, now our debt service goes up substantially and our risk factor goes up substantially. And thanks to our good old central banks and the Federal Reserve, now we're paying ridiculous amounts on construction money. So where construction loans, we were able to get them at 6-7%. Now on traditional lending, we're getting them at over 10%, which again increases our liability, which is bad for equity raising, and it's bad for development right now. But what is good is giving away a little equity. And here's why. And so when we have the ability to have 100% equity retention in a deal, what we're able to do is now we have options, because we own 100% of the equity, right? So when we own 100% of the equity and we control that asset, we can give little bits and pieces of it away to investors, and we're able to hold the asset more risk-free. And investors like it too, because this is what it does for investors. Multiple things. One, it gives them an IRR, an internal rate of return, when they're exited out and the appreciation of that value of that asset goes up. That investor makes money. And what lands up happening with the investors is they become an owner of that property based on the percentage of what they're investing in to that asset. And now they get the tax write-offs and depreciation that we typically take on a long-term hold. Okay. So those are the positive attributes that an investor loves about taking equity standpoint. Now, what I love about it right now, and the way we actually retain equity in our deals, is now it gives us options. And the reason it gives us options is because now we have the ability to not service debt, and we're able to just give little slivers of percentages. So it's a win-win situation, because think about it this way. What's 100% of zero? It's zero, right? It's absolutely worthless. But what's 1% of 100? It's a profit. So if you give people equity, whether it's 1%, 3%, 5%, 10%, or whatever it is, now you don't have debt service, because they just have equity in the deal. Now they just own it. And at the end of the ownership, when we sell or refinance and stabilize the asset, now they can cash out, get their money back, or they can stay in the deal and they can cash flow from it forever and also take advantage of the tax write-offs and the cost segregation that we typically do to depreciate that asset. Okay. And now we don't have debt service anymore. So our risk goes down, our cost basis goes down. And so when we do that, it reduces our liability. So you're paying like a teeter-totter effect right now. When the market is really thriving and when it's really thriving and we have money that's expendable because values are going up, then I don't want to give away equity because typically money is inexpensive. We get it for less and our debt service doesn't falter our opportunity like it does today when money's expensive, because now we have massive debt service. Think about it this way, okay? Where we were getting institutional money at about between 6 and 7%, give or take. Well, let's call it 6.5%, okay, on construction money. Now, if we have like the assets that we're building are 200 unit, 150 unit, 250 unit deals. So by the time we get to the end of the development, we might have like a $40 million debt service to the bank. So if we do $40 million at 6%, okay, so watch, check this out. $40 million at 6%. And then we take the same $40 million at 10.5%, which is what construction money is going through institutional lenders, unless you go HUD. And HUD's a pain in the ass, but it works. So we're actually exercising a little bit of HUD financing right now because it actually takes our debt service down to about 5.5%, give or take. Their quote is 5.1, but there's fees in there. So I'm actually underwriting at about 5.8%, okay, for HUD. Now, when we take $40 million, punch this in your calculators, times 0.06%, that's $2.4 million a year. Divide that by 12. That's $200,000 per month in debt service at 6%, okay? It's already high risk, right? Now, so our motive to be on time and to get that asset done is extremely motivating. Now we take that same $40 million asset and we multiply that times 10.5%. So times 0.105, that's $4.2 million divided by 12. That's $350,000 per month in debt service. The difference of what is between just a year and a half ago to today on a monthly basis of $150,000 variance. So ladies and gentlemen, if you run late on your project, or let's say that project as a whole lands up taking you 12 to 18 months, you're going to have yourself an additional $1, $2, $3 million in debt service on an asset that big. So the point being is that increases your liability. And with values getting compressed because of interest rates going up and cap rates going up, the last thing you want to do is add to your bottom line basis of debt service, because it lands up just killing your deal. And so one of the big things is being able to reduce that. So right now, because of the way that we retain equity, we're able to go in and we're able to give off small slivers of equity to investors to reduce our liability, debt service, and everything else, which is absolutely incredible. So the best way to finance real estate development, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a multitude of different ways depending on what you're developing. But from rewatching this video, if you're just joining us now, go back, rewatch from the beginning. I give you guys some insight on three different ways, but 4 different means to be able to finance commercial real estate developments. But go back and rewatch it if you didn't see it from the beginning, and put hashtag repeat in the comments section wherever you're rewatching it at, whether it's Instagram or whether it's YouTube or whatever platform you're watching it at. Now, ladies and gentlemen, right now is a great time to start leveraging development deals, and I'll tell you why. It's an election year next year. And with it being an election year next year, one of the biggest things that we've learned historically is that whatever party, Republican or Democrat, when it's their first 4-year term, the Democrats want to retain the control of both the House, the Senate, and the presidency during the time that they have their term. And if it's a 4-year term, they want to be able to make it look like they're a super rock star. Now, how Biden does that after the mess and hole that he's dug us in, I have absolutely no idea how they're going to make him look like a rock star. All I know is that historically, ladies and gentlemen, historically, we see interest rates go down, and whatever political parties in play at that time makes them look like a superhero, like if they fix the economy miraculously. So the chances of money becoming less expensive and our ability to go in and leverage what's happening economically during an election period is going to be to our benefit next year, God willing. And so know that a lot of this may shift over the next 6 to 9 months, and you might be able to take advantage of cheaper money and better quality terms for assets that you're looking to purchase right now today. But if you don't, the means that we're talking about right now on this video is what you should be paying attention to be able to exercise the best return on investment and the least amount of debt service liability to your development deal as humanly possible. So ladies and gentlemen, if you love this content and you want more like it, click and subscribe to our YouTube channel, pound that thumbs up button. And ladies and gentlemen, we're signing off from Wednesday's Real Talk on Real Estate, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Till then, you guys have a great day and God bless. Go out and compound your success.